Can Democrats realistically win the Senate in 2020?
Yes. But in order for Democrats to win the Senate, Biden must win the presidency. The Democrats are not going to win the Senate without Biden providing some coattails in some key states, such as Arizona, which normally is Republican, but has been changing demographically. And Biden has been leading the polls there, though not by much. It wouldn't take but a 3 or 4 point flip to Trump to take Arizona, and he only carried Arizona by about 3 points in 2016. So it's a competitive state, a lot of work to be done. Maine is another example. Trump got the Southern electoral vote and from Maine too, because they're one of the 2 states, Nebraska being the other, that splits their electoral votes based on how the candidates do in the individual congressional districts. But Susan Collins is in considerable trouble, and she has been thought to be safe before and has always gotten elected, reelected, but not this time. It'll be close. And, there are a lot of other races that could turn partly on how the presidential candidates do. But absolutely, it's possible. Last year at this time, I think most people thought it was, if not a long shot, then a medium shot. And they were thinking more of Democrats winning 50-50, splitting the Senate with a Democratic vice president providing the tie-breaking vote to organize the Senate. And that's been done before. Dick Cheney was the tiebreaker for 6 months, first 6 months of the Bush administration, second Bush administration, I should say, or George W. Bush's administration. So that could work, but it's always better to have an absolute majority so that your committees aren't tied. A lot of things simply die in committee. But it's doable. Now I think we look at it differently because at least for the time being, and it's only June, it's early June, at least for the time being, Trump is doing badly. And Biden is leading by varying amounts, but certainly by enough to win outright, not just the popular vote, but also the electoral college vote. So, it's doable. Whether it is going to be done is another question entirely. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy. We don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. We don't know what's going to happen with the police behavior and the protests and riots associated with it. We don't know any of those things. Until we have the answers, or at least tentative answers, to where those 3 big factors are going, you can't really project much of anything.
Are there states where you think split ticket voting could happen between the president and the Senate?
Well, it's always possible, particularly in very close races where the presidential race, say, is decided by a point. Sure, you could have a split result, but let's always keep in mind that fewer and fewer states are splitting their votes at the top layer. So when a president carries a state, normally the Senate seat goes in that direction. In 2016, there wasn't a single state who voted for Clinton and a Republican senator, or who voted for Trump and a Democratic senator among the seats that were up. So more than likely, the vast majority will go in the same direction as the presidential race in each state. But there can be exceptions, but there won't be many. I can certainly bet on that one. There won't be many.
Are there any states that you were surprised by in terms of competition or which way they're leaning right now?
Right now, well, you're always surprised when a state that has been firmly in one party's camp ends up flipping to the other side. And you always ask, is this the beginning of a trend, or is it simply an exception for this year because of specialized circumstances? Look, Virginia flipped in 2008. Virginia had voted for the Republican candidate in every single election since 1952, with the exception of Lyndon Johnson in 1964 in his landslide, but suddenly went to Barack Obama. It turned out that was the beginning of a trend. Republicans haven't won anything since 2009 statewide. They've lost everything. Now, Arizona is the one I think people are looking at most closely. Georgia may be another one, but Arizona is the one we're looking at right now, because Arizona looks to be going the way of Colorado. And Colorado is now a reliably Democratic state. It used to be heavily Republican. You could pretty much count on on Colorado going Republican, but now it goes Democratic. So states do transition. Now, on Trump's side, you'd have to say you want to watch a state like Minnesota. Don't be surprised if after what's happened in Minneapolis, that state could flip. And Amy Klobuchar's chances have been hurt, not ruined, but hurt by what's been happening there. I could see a backlash, or what we used to call in the 60s, a white lash. And whites are still about 70% of the vote, 30% minorities, 70% white in the country as a whole. And Minnesota almost voted for Trump last time. 1.5 points. Minnesota, 1.5 points. Either that is changing demographics more toward blue collar whites, or Hillary Clinton was really unpopular. And we're going to find that out November 3rd. Was it just Hillary Clinton, or was it something deeper?
Shifting gears to the presidential election, there's been a growing number of prominent Republicans that have said they're either not going to support Trump's reelection or they're on the fence.
That party not only doesn't care what its prior leaders are saying, it didn't care in 2016 either. They were these same Republicans, the same ones you're seeing mentioned now, were opposed to Trump then. Some of them came out publicly, some of them were rumored and whispered about, but people knew. And it affected nothing. This completely atypical candidate ended up winning the Republican nomination. You couldn't find an establishment Republican who was for Trump. And people who would surprise you that I talked to on Deep Background or off the record were just apoplectic, including some of those who will not allow even a quarter of an inch of difference between themselves and Trump right now. And I mean in top leadership positions. Okay? They say they love him so much. Well, I know what they said, and they know what they said. Maybe the rest of the world will never know. But I'm simply telling you that there's nothing new here. And in the Republican Party, the Bush Party is dead and the Trump Party rules. And so all these people from the Bush side of the aisle have exactly zero impact on the Republicans. If they have any impact, it will be on independents, and there aren't many of them. We're so polarized, we're down to a few percent who are truthfully independent. Everybody else is in their foxholes. It's done. People know how they're going to vote.
Well, I'm sure you know then that Joe Biden is planning to bring moderate Republicans into his coalition. Do you think he can successfully do that?
Oh, sure. He can put a committee together. They're not going to have any impact. Hillary Clinton had a lot of the same ones, and there'll be some senior Republicans who will be deeply concerned. Boy, they're always concerned, and they're going to be deeply concerned about all the things that Trump has done. And in the end, I guarantee you, they won't vote for Biden. Now, the committee members will, because they're on the list for appointments. Republicans for Biden. One thing that Democrats fear about Biden, and I think it's a legitimate fear, is that this fellow who started in the Senate, started with his first election in 1972. It's a long time to serve, and then 8 years as vice president. He was used to a system where the Senate and government generally was often bipartisan. And in between elections, at least, you could get bipartisan coalitions together in the national interest. Well, that's dead as a doornail. And he's still talking about how I'm the one to elect because I can get the Republicans to work with us and we're going to go back to the way it was. No, sir. You are never going to go back to the way it was. We are so polarized. And the Democratic constituencies want to see Republicans pay for what Trump has done over the last 3.5 years. I guarantee you that. The first time President Biden reaches out to Republicans and makes a big compromise that means Democrats will get, say, 60% and Republicans will get 40%, you're going to see a revolution. Democrats aren't going to put up with that. That's how angry they are at what Trump has done and what his people have done. And they want investigations. Every time I go to a Democratic group to test the waters, First thing they say to me is, I want Trump prosecuted. I want to see him in jail. And then they name everybody else. They want them all in jail. Well, they're not going to jail for the most part. There may be some things that will cause some of them to go to jail. There may be some indictments, but they want blood. They want blood, just like the Republicans did 4 years ago, put her in jail, for Hillary Clinton.
Should President Trump be concerned about a drop in support among white evangelicals?
Well, we're not at election time. They'll go right back to it. 80% for him. Some polls had it higher than that back in November of 2016, but they'll go right back to him. The Jerry Falwell clan, they'll go right back to him. They're another group that wrings their hands a lot. They're so concerned about this and that. No, they'll vote for him.
Right. So in general, you'd say that the current wave of criticism that we're seeing in the media probably won't sway any voters?
Well, not any. They're all, we're talking about probably this time close to 150 million people. Of course, there are always some that will do anything. But I'm talking about more than a handful, enough to sway some key states. Now, look, if the economy continues collapsing, if this early unemployment sign was misleading, and we're going to go right back into a depression-like state, if we have a second serious wave of the pandemic in the fall, if this police brutality issue and the protests continue unabated, at least in some places, all the way through to the fall, you're going to have a lot of things happen. And they could produce a substantial Trump defeat, but there are also ways it could produce a substantial Biden defeat. If the election were today, you'd bet on Biden. If the election were on this date 4 years ago, you would have bet on Clinton. She was well ahead. Doesn't mean a thing.
Shifting to the Black Lives Matter protests, how much tangible reform do you think that these protests can create?
There will be some reform, and the reason is because I suspect even a few KKK members, like that idiot up there in Northern Virginia who ran over protesters, even some of them watching that video realized that those policemen, and particularly the one that put his knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd, this was outrageous. It can happen to them too, even though they're not black. That's what everybody thinks. If they're that brutal, under the right set of circumstances, I could get the knee to the neck too. Just about I haven't talked to a single person who didn't think it was outrageous. From liberal, conservative, libertarian, right wing, they all thought it was outrageous. So that helps the movement to get something. Now, the something will vary from locality to locality and state to state. Minneapolis, you won't be able to recognize the security and police system in 2 or 3 years, and there are going to be a lot of changes immediately. In southern states, it depends. If it's a majority African-American city or a majority minority city, a Houston or something like that, yeah, you're going to see a lot of changes. Dallas and a lot of other cities, even in places like Alabama and Mississippi. But if you're talking about, white-controlled areas in the South and the border states, they may have a new police board or something like that. They may ban chokeholds. I think that may become a norm nationally because they're killing people. We've now got a whole series of these videotapes. And again, most people think it's absolutely outrageous and must stop. But defund the police, way too far, way too far. And that's why Biden was so smart to come out immediately and say, I'm not for that. That seems radical to the very people Biden has got to win over so he doesn't end up being Hillary Clinton part 2.
Biden also needs to win over black voters, though. So what do you think he needs to do to appease black voters as well?
In the case of African Americans, I think you, number one, point to Donald Trump. That should be enough for most. People say, oh, it's not enough just to say your opponent is bad. In Donald Trump's case, yes, it is. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's enough. Biden is bland. I like him personally. I'll tell you sometime about the day that I spent escorting him around the University of Virginia when one of his sons was considering coming here in the mid-1980s. And we spent a lot of time together that day. But anyway, he's a nice fellow. You have to try hard to dislike him. But people are not going to feel about him ever the way they felt about Barack Obama or a number of other people I could name. It's just not going to happen because he's not that kind of candidate. And the man's going to be 78 in November. He'll be 78 when and if he's inaugurated, the oldest by far in American history. He'll be 82 at the end of the first term. I mean, it's hard to believe. Trump's no spring chicken. He's 74, I think, one day this week, I believe. Anyway, the point is that I don't think there's any way that Biden can present his reforms in a way that would be enough to cause the emotions to stir, the blood to pump, to get a very, very large percentage of eligible voters in the African-American community or the Latino community, where he's got bigger problems than he does in the African-American community. I don't think it's there, but you can certainly use what Trump has done and said. You put a reel of that together and you air it on shows disproportionately watched by African-Americans, on African-American radio stations and African-American newspapers, for that matter, generally to reach everybody. And it's going to produce a lot of votes. Mm-hmm. And there are positive campaigns and there are negative campaigns. This one's going to be a negative campaign on both sides. Really, really deeply negative.
Right. I think I've seen the term anti-enthusiasm thrown around.
You mean Biden?
Yeah, that he's running on an anti-enthusiasm campaign.
Now, consider this, though. Trump has ultra-enthusiasm.
Right.
The problem is he's never, not for one day, been at 50% or over his entire presidency. Okay, so you have to depend on third-party candidates splitting enough votes off to make this thing work for you in the electoral college. And it will not necessarily work out that way twice. I mean, he threaded a whole bunch of needles to win that race in a way that was just remarkable, extraordinary. And you wonder if, like a penny you flip and it ends up on its side, that happens like 1 out of every 10,000 times you flip a penny. That's what happened in 2016. You gonna bet on that again? It's possible, but it's not likely.
Do you think that third-party candidates could have a substantial effect on this election?
Absolutely. Depends on who they are, how well funded they are, whether by themselves or by Russia, and absolutely can have an impact. But let's see. So far, the best known potential candidate, Justin Amash, the congressman from Michigan, who left the Republican Party and voted for Trump's impeachment, was going to run for the Libertarian nomination and might have won it. It was questionable, but he withdrew. The other people running for the Greens, for the, Jesse Ventura is talking about running, but he's so way out there now that I just don't think he'll ever be able to get even a substantial tiny vote. So we're expecting that 6% of the voters voted for a third party or independent candidate last time. That's an unusually high percentage if you don't have a nationally known figure. And we didn't have a nationally known figure. What these people were really saying is, I don't like my party candidate and I don't like the other party candidate. So I'm gonna waste my vote, quote unquote, waste my vote, though everybody's entitled to vote for whoever they want to. I don't see anybody who can do that. And we expect the 6% from 2016 to drop to about 3%. Now, that still allows for Trump to win if those votes are concentrated in places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan and Arizona, and we could name a few others. But again, what are the odds? It's possible, but for everything to fall just right, just like it did in 2016, I doubt it.
Assuming these protests continue on, can Trump feasibly run on a message of law and order?
Sure, for whites. White voters will always be attracted to that. They're the majority, and they're the threatened majority. It doesn't work as well with college-educated whites. but it really works with blue collar whites, and particularly blue collar white men. He is still cleaning up with blue collar white men, Trump that is. So yeah, it can work. We'll have to see.
Last thing I want to ask, what effect do you think mail-in voting might have on the election?
Well, I hope it'll increase turnout. It's also, from a public health standpoint, the best way to do it. And Trump's objections are laughable, just laughable. But of course, he doesn't believe in research. He doesn't believe in science. He doesn't care what the experts say about anything. I know more than the generals. That was the most revealing sentence of his 26 campaign. He knows more than everybody about everything. So he has ignored all the research on mail-ins. It does not disproportionately help one party or the other. It does marginally increase turnout. The group that will be most hurt if mail-in balloting is restricted is the one age cohort who voted for him. His entire election depended on age 65 and over. They gave him a solid majority of their votes. All the other age groups either voted for Clinton or were tied. So who's going to be most hesitant to come out to the polls and take a chance on getting that virus? Maybe the people who are most likely to die from the virus. Wouldn't you think? That's kind of logical. And so who's going to be hurt? Trump. And it's total hypocrisy. He and his family vote by mail-in ballot. See, it's okay for them. It's okay for people who support them, but it's not okay for people who might dare to vote for the opposition. It's just how people can take this stuff seriously is beyond me.
What about polls that show that Democrats are more concerned about getting sick than Republicans are?
Well, that's because Democrats are disproportionately minority, disproportionately low income, and those are precisely the groups that are hurt, along with elderly people. And the elderly who are, and I'm speaking of my age group, the elderly who are most afraid of the virus. So it all fits together. It's pieces of the same puzzle. So that's why. It's another reason why Republicans want to suppress that side of the vote, whether it's, letting the virus do it for them, or minimizing mail-in voting, or adding voting restrictions and voter ID requirements and all of these things. As they lower voter turnout, the likelihood of their winning goes up. They know it. The Democratic Party knows it. Everybody knows it.